I'd like to introduce Bruce Lunsford, candidate for United States Senator.
Well, it's good to be back in Hopkinsville. You know, I was here last year for the dinner, and it was an interesting experience because that night we had everything to ourselves. We weren't sharing the evening with Bill Clinton as is going to happen here later on this evening. So, given what's happened here with the presidential race, and you know, my friend David Tandy down here a little bit later is going to talk about the other side, we've created a lot of excitement about this race on Tuesday. It's going to be a big turnout. Kentuckians ought to be proud of what they're going to do on Tuesday. I think you could see a vote count as high as 40 to 45% of the Democratic Party in this election. And all of us who are Democrats should be proud of that. And, you know, one of the things that happens in politics in general is that things change, times change, and people change. But as I look at this race and see the way people feel, I'll tell you an interesting story. You know, there's a couple of things that do set me apart from the candidates in this race, particular in the race that I'm in for Tuesday. One is I served my country in the Army Reserves, the National Guard, and I understand the importance. And I did it during the Vietnam era, when this country watched a lot of units get called in, much like they've been called in this war, with soldiers that not only haven't been prepared maybe as well as they would have been if they'd been on active duty, but in this case, we have a junior senator that continues to say yes to the war, but no to the warriors. So he votes for the war every time, but he votes against our veterans every time. And you know, I'm proud to say that there are at least two key people in this state who stand out to the veterans who decided to endorse my campaign. One was Colonel Andrew Horn, who served in 1991 and served again in the first stage of this war. And he's seen that war from both sides. He saw one that was short in duration, but costly, and one that's continued to be long in duration. And to today, we received the endorsement of Heather Henry, and many of you know her as not only a former Miss America, but probably been the most outspoken individual in the state of Kentucky for the veterans. And if we don't get someone from Kentucky with all of the veterans we have in this state that's a Democrat that stands up for the veterans, we're not going to make this country much better. Because let's don't do what we did to Vietnam. Let's don't treat these individuals like they're part of the problem. They're part of the solution. And you know, it's easy to talk about being a Democrat when you haven't had a lot of activity in politics in your life. You know, before I thought about getting into the Senate race, and before Mr. Fisher thought about getting in the Senate race, I'd like to compare our contributions. I've given $120,000 to Democrats over the years. He'd given $4. 30 times more I had given before it occurred to me to enter this Senate race. 30 times more. And what I find most interesting is probably one of the people who got me to think about running in Senate was a fellow who won a Congress race against Ann Northrop in Louisville. And I know that Greg Fisher's a wealthy man, and I can't figure out why he didn't contribute to Jack Conway or to John Yarmouth when they ran against Ann Northrop. So there's lots of different signals about what makes you a good Democrat and a bad Democrat. And as I told one of the union officials that I've become very close to, I've known you individuals a long time because my dad was a union laborer. I said, did you ever cross the fence and support a Republican? Well, sure we have. But you're really a Democrat in principle, aren't you? And he said, absolutely. And I said, so am I. And I've lived a lifetime of being a Democrat, and I've proved it many ways. But I also am an American first. And when I think things are better for America, I'm going to react accordingly. And you know, everybody's become cynical about politics. This is an example here. Everybody has become cynical about politics. And they don't really think that politicians speak the truth. And I went to the KET dinner KET debate the other night. The security guard was a fellow named Eddie Kearns. And Eddie called me over and said, did you really cut tobacco when you were a kid? And I said, yes. He said, well, did you ever strip tobacco? And I said, sure, many times. I said, that's where I actually learned the facts of life when I was a kid. And he said, well, can you tell me what the grades are on the stalk? And I went through, and he said, you really did cut tobacco when you were a kid. They don't believe politicians anymore. And they've got a good reason not to. And when I come down here to Hopkinsville, I see a lot of good friends. My friend Bill Bruce has been my friend for 30-some odd years. I don't change my friends very often. They stick with me and I stick with them. You know, to have a friend, you got to be a friend. Jim Bruce back here, 30 years ago, 25, 30 years ago, he helped me learn the legislature when I worked for John Y. Brown Jr. I was a kid. I was green. He made me a better man. And you're very fortunate you were represented by somebody like him. Freddie Nestler, who's here tonight, came over to see me just to say hi because he worked hard for me last time in the governor's race. Friends is what it's all about. And I'm looking forward to my friends in Hopkinsville helping me out because I know what it's like to live in a farming community. You have to drive your tractors, your trucks. You got fuel costs that are $4.25 for diesel. And it's going to get worse unless you get new leadership. And it's going to get tough on your schools as those buses drive. It's time to step up and do something different. It's time to do it with somebody that's willing to fight for you and your interest and has the ability to do it in an independent fashion. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.